As you know that MCA is going to start with
This call is now being recorded.
as you all know that MCA is going to start with the pool selections for the academic year 2020 and 21. We want to enhance the mooting culture as much as possible, and to strengthen the mooting culture in our university, we are going to organize some of the sessions. We know that it is impossible for us to meet physically, so the virtual meeting is the only possibility that we are going to opt for. As you all know that mooting is one of the most important activity in the law college. Every student want to do a reputed moot in his college life. But during the moot time, they are having a lot of issues and troubles. For example, how to go with the moot problem, how to frame the issues, how to research, how to prepare for oral rounds, and major important issue is about the speaker's note and some of the mental health condition in his life during the mooting areas. Therefore, to give you the brief introduction about the basics of mooting and other details regarding mooting, we are having today Charu and Arpita as a speaker for this session. They are having a great mooting record in the university life. Let me just highlight some of the very important or great achievements of both of them. Charu has been participated in sixth Raj Anand and Anand Intern IP Moot Court competition, and she was semi-finalist in that moot. She also won Best Speaker and Best Memorial Award for that moot. She has also participated in 11th and Nalsar BR Sahani Moot Court competition and was semi-finalist in that moot. She has also participated in 10th Amity National Moot Court competition and was semi-finalist and Best Speaker. Arpita has participated in FDI arbitration moot, national round. She was quarterfinalist and also participated in the world round. She was also semi-finalist in first NUJS Khetan and Company client counseling competition. We are great and pleased to have you all, both of you, for the session. Now, we would like to request you to please take up the session, and from here on, Gokul will be assisting you guys and moderating the session. Thank you very much. Charu, you're not audible.
Am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Harshit, for such a great introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Charu Vyas, and today Arpita and I, we both will discuss how, why, and when should you moot. Also, we would, in the end, like Harshit already stated, that we'll address the issue of mental health with respect to mooting in college. With this respect, I think Harshit has said already a lot. Over to you, Arpita.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, so good evening, all of you. First of all, hope that wherever you are, you're doing good. So, for the vast majority of you that I'm interacting for the first time, I am Arpita Pandey and I'm a fifth year seniors of yours. And today, Charu and I will be talking a little bit about how to go about mooting. Now, it's a known fact that there is no straitjacket formula of what works and what doesn't work in a mood. But today, what we're trying to do basically is to gather from our experiences and what worked for us, what did not work for us, and share that with you. So, how we have planned this session is that we are breaking down the entire mooting process into the different steps that are involved, and we'll be telling you a little bit about those steps. But before we begin with the process of mooting, both of us wanted to gather from you all a little bit about why do you think you want to moot. So I would like the help of MCA here. We have prepared a short question for you all to fill. I think it's available in the chat box. Gokul, is it put up on the chat box?
Hi Arpita, I'm just putting the link in the
Okay.
chat box.
So while I'll give you 30 seconds, you guys to fill it up. It will be up in a minute now.
Is it up right now?
Sorry, I can't seem to see it there on the chat box.
All right. I mean, you start with the session. Just a minute. I'll make
Okay,
sure.
so while he's putting up the questionnaire, I would like to discuss a little bit about what are the major reasons why people take up mooting. Okay, so first one of them is that you're genuinely interested to know what this activity is about. And honestly, that's a good enough reason to start any activity in law school, more so mooting, because 10 different people will be telling you 10 different experiences they had while mooting. But this is one activity which is best experienced firsthand. So yeah, I mean the second reason why people take up mooting is there's this notion, and I also had it for a very long time, that having mooting experience in your CV is absolutely essential. With the 4 years that I've had in law school, and have seemed to change my thoughts on this, and I'll tell you why. So speaking strictly from a placement point of view, I have seen people who have had very limited exposure to mooting, or sometimes no experience at all with mooting. Yeah, I think the survey is up. Please guys take 30 seconds and fill it up. Meanwhile, I'll continue. Okay, so there's this notion that having mooting on your CV is an absolute essential. And speaking strictly from a placement point of view, I have seen people who have had very limited exposure, or sometimes no experience at all in mooting, and that's not been a major stumbling block in them securing placements. Coming to coming to the last reason, and I know that many of you will not admit to this, but the reason why a lot of us take up mooting is because everyone else around us is mooting. And there's this culture, not just in our university, but in law schools in general, that if you're utilizing your time doing mooting, then you are utilizing your time well. And that if you have had a mooting accomplishment, then you sort to seem arrived in your college. Well, I mean, that's a reason that might get you to start mooting, but given how much effort, time that mooting takes, this peer pressure to moot will not take you very far. Having said that, the reason I'll tell you what I personally feel whether you should moot or you should not moot is, at the end of the day, in your 5 years in law school, this is one activity worth giving a shot at least once. And there's all this about mooting, honing your skills of drafting skills, researching skills, speaking skills, analytical skills. But why I personally feel that you should moot at least once is that it gives you an exposure to such niche areas of law that you'll not get to study in law school. And even if you're taking up ordinary topics like some things that you've studied in law school, like criminal law or anything that kind, mooting will get you to know what is happening, what is practically relevant, what is contemporary. And I've seen a lot of people taking up niche areas while mooting and developing an interest in them. So I personally feel that this is one activity that you should at least try once in your law school. Charu, what do you think?
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, Charu, you are audible.
So to add to what Arpita already stated, I think that mooting actually gives you a practical insight as to how the legal system works. So I guess that a lot of you have already interned in a district court or a high court or supreme court. So mooting is very different from what actually happens in the courtroom. However, it helps you build an insight as to how you should build your arguments, how to understand the facts, how to apply the law to the facts, and thereafter coming to a conclusion. This is what mooting helps you in. It builds your analytical reasoning and understanding of the law. So from my experience, from my 4 years experience in law school, I have had the most amazing experience from mooting. That's because I've learned the most from mooting. So I would definitely encourage everybody to take this up. However, towards the end of the session, we'll also address the issue which Arpita already stated. This is the reason why we asked you all to fill up the survey. That's how mooting in college affects your mental health. It's not just the peer pressure, but also the fact that while you are mooting, there is so much mental pressure over you that you tend to hate the entire process. So these are something that we'll address at the end of the session. First, let's build up as to what mooting is, how it's done, how to draft, what to research, and all that. Should we start with the... Okay. So, guys, so we have basically categorized the entire thing into 4 parameters. The first is that how should you approach the moot problem? So, I'll essentially deal with the national moot perspective, whereas Arpita will deal with the arbitration and international perspective. So, while you're reading a moot problem, what you need to consider is that there are certain facts which might have the possibility of being similar to the actual case in hand. So if anybody has ever mooted, so you must have seen that the moot problem has certain facts which are similar to the ongoing case or a case which has already been decided. However, the moot problem does not always have all the facts. So make sure that you do not create the facts. By saying do not create the facts, I mean that do not take the actual case's facts into your moot problem. What will happen is that the judges, when they'll judge you, they'll consider only the facts that are mentioned in the fact sheet. Of course, you can refer to the case which has already been mooted in the court or is still pending. However, you should restrict yourself to the facts. Further, for your approach to the moot problem, ideally what you should do is, so everybody has their own formula. But what I have done is that when you approach the moot problem, you should read the facts again and again, try to identify the issues. So for example, if there are 3 issues, the first relates to the maintainability, second one relates to, say, issue in respect of constitutional law, and the third one relates to criminal law. So try to divide the relevant facts with respect to every issue. This will help you in understanding as to what the drafter of the problem is trying to seek from you. Also, there is often a possibility that the facts may intermingle amongst themselves. In fact, that is almost the possibility every time. But you need to understand that you need to twist the facts in such a way that they favor your side. Because, of course, the facts have been drafted in a manner that they favor both the side and not just one side. So that's what you need to keep in your mind. Also, get a printout of the moot problem as soon as the moot problem is released. I've seen a lot of people that they tend to refer the moot problem through their laptops or through their mobile. So I know that everybody has different approach, but this actually helps you in reading the moot problem by memorizing where the actual line of the moot problem is. This has helped me. Now, this may or may not work for you, but this is just a suggestion. That's all for the approach towards the moot problem. Now, over to you, Arpita.
Okay, so Charu has already told you that what I'll be dealing with will essentially help you with your arbitration pool, or if you're planning to do arbitration moots. So I thought that to show you how to approach an arbitration problem, I'll show you an actual arbitration problem. And the reason why I'm doing so is because I felt that you don't approach an arbitration problem sequentially, as in not in the order in which it's given in the problem. So give me a second and I'll share the actual 2018 pool problem, arbitration pool problem. Also, guys, if you have any questions during the meeting, please drop them in the chat box. Charu and I will be more than happy to address them, because given the session is generic in nature, we'll be very happy to answer specific questions. Okay, I just want to check with you. Can you see the problem?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So this is a 2018 arbitration pool problem. And the reason why I picked it up is because given other arbitration problems, it's a comparatively simpler and shorter one. Arbitration problems tend to be very bulky and very fact intensive, which is in fact a good thing because that gives you a lot of room to play with your facts. Now, I'll tell you. So, first, you need to go to the notice of arbitration. Now, this is the claimant's version of the story. Here, you will get to know what the parties are, how did they get into an understanding, how did the dispute arise, all from the claimant's side. After this, you should ideally, go to the respondent's version, which is the response to notice for arbitration. Okay, this will basically contain the same format, facts, what the parties are, the understanding, but all from the respondent's side. Now, this is a comparatively shorter problem and the parties don't have major objections to the facts with each other. But usually problems also contain a thing called statement of uncontested facts. When the facts between the parties are so diametrically opposite, in that case, they give you a statement of uncontested facts, which is something that you should ideally rely on while making any argument because those facts are agreed to between the parties. After you have done this, I would suggest that you should go to something which is called a procedural order. Now, this procedural order is basically, will give you all details of where the hearings will take place, what is the forum. But the reason why I'm telling you is that after reading both the claimant's and the respondent's version, you should go to the procedural order, is because it will give you the issues. And not just the issues, it will specify which issues are being argued in that particular hearing. After you have, gone through the issues, and here I'll just tell you a little bit about the kinds of issues that come up. So first are the procedural issues, and these issues generally deal with, is it the right forum before which the case is being brought? Is it being brought in the right manner? Is there any problem in the manner in which the adjudicators are being appointed and stuff like that? So the first issue, as you can see, should the Court of Arbitration of SIAC order the removal, blah, blah. This is basically the procedural issue. Now, the second type of issues that you will come across are the substantive issues. And these issues basically deal with what obligations were undertaken by the parties, which party breached their obligation. This is the second type of issues. The third kind of issues, which are basically interrelated to the substantive issues, are the issues of cost or damages. Now, only when you establish that a person has caused a breach of an obligation will the issue of costs arise. Okay, so you can see the third issue, which is relating to costs. After you have seen the procedural order, what you need to see is what is the legal understanding between the parties, because you have seen the facts from both the sides, the claimant side, the respondent's version. Now we need to determine what was the legal understanding between the parties. For that, after you have done this, what I suggest you should do is you should see the contract between the parties. This is the most important exhibit if you're approaching any arbitration problem, because this will give the legal understanding between the parties. After you have understood this, then I would say that you can visit all the exhibits, and exhibits will give you additional facts, will tell you, okay, what was exactly told to the other party, what was not told to the other party. So yeah, this is pretty much how you will approach a arbitration problem. I guess, Charu, you can take it up the next point that we're
Yes. So the next point that we intend to discuss is with respect to the research. So many a times when I have seen a lot of people that they start their research right from the database or through the commentary. So I'll give you an example to tell you how you should research. So for example, if there is an issue with respect to maintainability under Article 136 of Constitution. So once you have identified the issue, read the provision from the BEAR Act, do a general Google search as to what that provision is, because you will find as to what its interpretation is, and then go to the commentary. Then once you go through the commentary, you will realize that there are some major case laws or the leading case laws, and then you should go through those case laws to identify as to what all things are important for you to incorporate in your mood problem, right? Also, this is issue specific. Now let's come to the fact specific research. Now there are a lot of facts in the mood problem which in a way denote to the law. So for example, if there are specific words which you cannot understand, say for example, if the problem relates to competition law and it has words like relevant market. So relevant market may seem to be a very general word. However, it has completely different understanding in respect of competition law. When you see section 4, under which you need to determine the relevant market, it talks about abuse of dominant position. Okay, so if the problem has an issue relating to abuse of dominant position, you don't straight away go to the commentary, or you don't straight away go to a database of Manupatra and search case laws relating to section 4 abuse of dominant position. Instead, what you should do is first read it through the Google, like do a general Google search. This does not follow only for section 4 of Competition Act, but for all the facts. Identify what all things are there, because you will understand it in a very general language. Once you are through it, go to the commentary. Through the commentary, you will understand that when you are trying to approach section 4 of Competition Act, there are 3 factors. First, you need to determine the relevant market. Then you need to see that whether the enterprise is dominant in the relevant market or not. And then you need to see that whether that particular enterprise has abused its dominant position in the relevant market or not. This is how you should go about research. Then once you are done with that, do a general search. Try to think of the basic arguments. Don't think that you need to bring up some creative argument for everything and anything. First, do the basic research. Once you are through it, then switch to bringing up some arguments that might give you an edge over the other competitors. That's all I think I would say about researching.
So yeah, I agree with Charu to a large extent that right at the outset, don't jump into commentaries and stuff. I personally would divide research into 2 kinds. So the first would be a preliminary research, and then would be the problem-based research. And the preliminary research thing is very important, especially if you are picking up moods on niche areas where you have absolutely no idea of the terms that are used. And for that, like Charu suggested, first of all, do a basic background research. Like she gave you the example of a competition law. I would like to, give a parallel from my mood, say, FDI investment. Now there are terms like FET violation, which when I'm reading the problem for the first time, I have no idea what they mean. So that would definitely, hinder my understanding of where the problem is going. And for that, it is very important that you do a preliminary research. And I say this more so for international or arbitration moods, because the reason is that you get comparatively longer periods of time for preparation. So, ideally any arbitration mood or international mood would give you a time commitment for 4-5 months, where you have time that, the starting 15-20 days you can invest to building upon your concepts. Once you've gone through the problem and identified, okay, these are the terms that that are being used and I have no idea about them, do a Google research, read a blogs, and then try and read from what are the sort of famous commentaries in that subject matter. In addition to that, I would say that try and get a flavor of that mood, because each mood has its own style in which things are done. So, and that's not limited to the research phase of mooting. Do it all along, from the starting till the end. See past year memorials that are best memorials. See speaker rounds, how arguments in that particular area work. Try and get a flavor of that. That's it with the preliminary research part. Okay, so for research, given it's very context specific, I can't give you a lot of information about that. But I thought that I'll share with you some resources. Few of them are pretty general, like you can use them regardless of the kind of mood you're doing. And few of them are arbitration specific and would be sort of a head start when you are starting your preparation. So I'll present my screen now, just a second. Okay, so the first resource, kind of a hack which helps, is LibGen. Given this year that you will be doing all your preparation from your home and will not get a chance to visit the library and have a look at the commentaries, this is a good place to check out that if you want to read a commentary and it's not available at other places, I would suggest that you can try LibGen. I'll show you how it works, just a second. Okay, so let's say we want to download Red Fern Hunter. It's a commentary for international arbitration, commercial arbitration. You just put it here, check if it's available or not, and here you have it. So you can download it from here. Another hack which has kind of helped me get around places where I want to download an article, but it's not open access and the university is not subscribing to that particular database. So for that, there's this hack called Sci-Hub. Wait, I'll show you how that works. Yeah. So here I have an example of an article from Cambridge University Press, which I want to, and it's not open access. So this is the Cambridge University Press article, and this is not open access. Now I want to read it. So I can try getting around the payment gateway by using Sci-Hub. All I need to do is that I have to copy the DOI number. Most good journals will give you their article links in DOI format. You just have to put it here. And it has sidestepped the payment gateway, and here you have the article with you. Okay, it doesn't work for all platforms, like Oxford University Press is pretty smart about it, but you can try for a lot of journals, it works. So these are a few general resources. I also wanted to share some specific arbitration resources. One such place is cisg.law.pace.edu, and it's an excellent database, like right from the bare text to legislative history, cases, and commentaries on each article. It's very well organized and it's very detailed. So if you're planning to do an arbitration moot and you have CISG as your substantive law, which is the case in most of the cases, use pace.law.edu. It's an excellent website. Other than that, a problem with arbitration moots is case laws are not very readily available. Sometimes they are not made public. Sometimes the language is, they are in a language that we don't understand. For case law specifically, you can use of course you can use unistrial.org for all your purposes. They have a lot of researches going on about contemporary topics on commercial arbitration, but their case law database is very well organized. It has major jurisdictions covered, so it is one of those places you can really use to get your cases. Yeah, that's pretty much I would say about research, because it's very context specific. Next, I think we can try if that's
Yes.
then we'll move to drafting.
Yes. Before we move on to drafting, I have one point to add to research. So while you are reading an act, so for example, the moot problem relates to Section 4 of the Competition Act. You don't actually have to go through the entire act. Before you approach a particular statute, you need to understand its scheme. So if you analyze Competition Act, it's basically divided into three parameters, three areas. The first would be anti-competitive agreements, second would be the abusive dominant position, and the third is in respect of mergers and acquisition. Once you understand this, it becomes easier for you to approach the statute and thereafter continue with your research. You don't have to, in addition, you don't have to know the entire law. You just have to know the specific law and the general law. General law as in, obviously the judges would expect you to know, so if the problem relates to Constitution of India, so the judges would obviously expect you to know the fundamental rights, even if the problem does not directly relate to it. Same goes with Competition Act. If the problem is in respect of Section 4, then the judges would expect you to know the procedure as to what happens, how does the procedure start, who sends the report to the commission, how does the Director General initiate the procedure, and all this. So then I would start with drafting. Now, while you're drafting your memorial, there are certain things that you need to keep in your mind. The first is, I'll start with the first page itself. The first page requires you to mention certain things. Now, these certain things are already mentioned in the rules of the moot, but you need to keep in mind that the name of the respondent and the petitioner should be correct. You need to understand that sometimes national problem comes as a complicated mixture of parties. So it may be difficult for you to understand that who is petitioner, who is respondent. Sometimes it happens that the respondent is also the petitioner in some other case. How do you manage all these things? So for this, you need to understand some concepts, that the two cases may be argued together. One of the party may seek to implicate himself in the case, so that because he has shown his interest in the case. So these are things which you need to keep in mind with respect to the parties. Now, when you proceed forward, while you are drafting your issues, you need to keep in mind the sequence in which you do it. Now, first you need to state the law which is relevant. Then you need to state the facts, and then the mixture of both, that is the conclusion. I'll explain you how. I'll give a general example. Say Article 136 of Constitution, it talks about special leave petition. The first issue talks about the maintainability of your matter. Now, special leave petition under 136 talks about that notwithstanding anything, the Supreme Court has the discretionary power to maintain the matter if it involves a substantial question of law. Now, this is like a I've said this in a very general manner, but there are three components. The first is that notwithstanding anything, this is the non-obstantive clause, which means that barring all the other provisions. Then second is that the Supreme Court has the discretion, and the third is that that the Supreme Court can entertain the matter. Now, when you consider all these things, so ideally what you should do is, that when you are drafting, your issues should state that whether the matter should be maintainable under Article 136 or not. Then you go on to your first sub-issue, that whether the Supreme Court has the locus to decide the particular matter or not. Second is whether the matter involves substantial question of law or not. Now, for substantial question of law, you bring on some case law which is relevant, that these are the particular facts which qualify under the parameters of substantial question of law. And then you finally present your conclusion. And now, conclusion should be the summary of the entire issue, not just the sub-issue. Because while the person is checking your memo, he will understand that you have analyzed all the sub-issues and thereafter come on to your conclusion. Now, also you need to keep in mind the page limit or the word limit, whatever has been prescribed by the competition. Then your sentences should be very simple, concise. Don't keep your sentences very complex. Then, while you are arguing, so I pay a lot of emphasis on the first issue of maintainability of, say, special leave petition or writ petition. That is because the judges try to test you as to how you answer their questions, because a lot of times the moot problem is inclined towards one side. So the judges might come across and say that, okay, counsel, we agree to what you are saying. We don't want to listen to you. We agree whatever you are saying. Now proceed on to the second issue. Are you fine with that? So you shouldn't, so obviously you would be perplexed, because what do you answer if the judge is already ready to accept your arguments without having heard you? So what you say is that the counsel seeks permission to state the facts in concise form so that it becomes easier for the opposite party as well as for the bench uh, to finally give the order. Just state this in concise. If the judge is very adamant, and just try to put forward your point 2 or 3 times and then move forward, because obviously you have time constraint also. Most national rounds, they give you 20 minutes for both the speakers. And some judges obviously are flexible with the time limit. However, you should keep your time limit, like you should keep the time in your mind, because some judges are not at all flexible with the time limit. Also, there are certain things that you need to keep in mind, like very basic concepts, that if there are particular terms involved in your moot problem, you need to have the exact definition from a source, let's say a case law. First of all, you'll obviously go to the statute. If the statute does not mention it, then go to the case law. If there's no case law which states the definition, or the definition is very complex, then you go to a dictionary. But try to find a definition. So, for example, if the judge asks you that what is the difference between jurisdiction and maintainability, obviously he wouldn't look forward to having a case law for making a differentiation. So you need to here make an understanding. But if there are some complex definitions, like for example, say relevant market under competition law, so you should know what a relevant market is. You should know that Section 2 of Competition Act defines relevant market. That's all I would say is about drafting. Also, in respect of footnotes and specifics of drafting, I think MCA will arrange a separate session. Arpita, you can take up.
So before I give you something about what I think, like some tips about drafting, the first important thing that I want all of you to keep in mind is not to treat drafting and researching as two mutually exclusive activities. Like it's a back and forth process, and the sooner you understand it, it's the better for you. The reason why I say so is because a lot of arguments while you're researching would make sense in your head, but when you put them down on paper, they would not make sense. And more so, when you're researching, you would have collected your research from 10, 20, 30 resources for each issue. If you're not putting them down simultaneously, then it will be a big problem for you when you sit down to write. And moreover, one other thing that's there is when you draft simultaneously, you will realize where the loopholes of your arguments are. So you will look for, okay, here is something that I need to put a case law, or here's something I need to strengthen my argument. So keep in mind that drafting and researching are not two mutually exclusive activities. It's a back and forth process. You have to do them simultaneously. That being said, there's something which helps me in drafting my arguments, and I would like to share that with you. It's called a roadmap or an argument map, and there's no particular format of making it. I mean, whatever way helps you make it, you can go for that format. The reason why we make an argument map is because, when you're collecting your information from so many resources simultaneously, at the end of the day, you somehow lose track of where you were trying to get at with that particular argument. So the argument map basically is a sort of a synopsis. Okay, with this argument, I want to get to this place. And then you put on your research from different resources. I'll show you one argument map that I made. Just give me a second. It's from my ICC moot court competition, and I'll show you what I'm trying to say. So it can be very rudimentary, or it can be refined, depends upon what works for you. I'll show you two argument maps that I had. Okay, so this is a very rudimentary one, and literally a flowchart of where I'm trying to get with my argument. I'll show you the more refined one. So what I've done here is that this is my issue. Now my issue pertained to something about double jeopardy, nebis in idem, that some case was tried in the national court, and can that again be taken up before the International Criminal Court. Now, after that, what I did was I put in all my factual narration from the problem. Like, what is the case that defense is trying to build? I put it factually. At this point of time, I have identified what my main legal arguments are going to be. So I have put them down as the major heads. See, so this will not contain very fine language. This will not contain footnotes or anything. It will just be like, see, here I have basically put where I'm trying to get with my argument. So the basic premise of this argument is that ICC has the power to exercise jurisdiction over the persons for blah blah blah. The crux being that here I've put in that argument where I want to get with that argument, so that later on I know when I'm putting in my data from different places where I intended to go with this argument. At some places, I have also identified what I'll be including to strengthen my argument, say examples or statistics, whatever. So this is one small exercise that I do before I sit down to draft my actual draft, because it helps me get a sense of direction of where I'm getting with that argument. Now, as far as the actual draft is concerned, I'll show you one memo from the last year, from the 2018 arbitration pool, and show you, okay, so what all is included, in what manner you should include them. There is no one set pattern to doing it, but it's just an overview of what you can do. So just give me a second. So this is the 2018 pool selections best memorial, and I'll show you what all it contains. So regardless of what kind of moot you're doing, I mean national, international arbitration, some things would definitely be there in your memo. And these are more or less frills that you add after you have put in your actual content. So yeah, see, this list of abbreviations, index of authorities, issues raised, all...
Arpita, I think the presentation has not been made. Can you do that?
Oh, sorry, just a second. Yeah, is it visible now?
Yes, it is now.
Sorry, so here I have with me the 2018's best memorial, and regardless of the kind of moot you're doing, some things would definitely be there. Just the manner of presentation would change. So it's the list of abbreviations, index of authorities, you would have your issues raised, you would have your summary of facts, you would have your summary of pleadings. This is something that you will make after you have put down all your pleadings, because this is sort of a gist of your pleadings, which you will be in a position to put after you have done your actual pleadings. So here I'll share with you one issue, how it's done, to show you, the format in which you can try. Okay. So this is a substantive issue, goods, and this is to the similar problem which I shared with you while I was talking about how to approach the problem. Here he has first tried to identify what his main arguments are, which you can see here, right? After he has made his main arguments, even in his main arguments, he's tried to make sub-arguments. And I'll not share with you the first arguments because they are purely factual. But yeah, one which is a mix I'll share to show you what scheme you can adopt. So yeah, here it's a mixed question of law and fact. So what he has essentially done is first state the law. He's explained the law using some supplementary resources. Then he has given a factual analysis, as can be established from the facts and effects. Here he has given a factual analysis. After that, he has continued with his analysis, and at the end is the conclusion, like Charu said, that you put a conclusion not just for that particular sub-issue or sub-argument, but the entire argument. Now you can use you can use your style. Most people do a law fact argument, law fact analysis conclusion scheme they adopt. You can also do a fact law analysis conclusion approach. It's totally up to you. It kind of depends upon the kind of moot you're doing, the format of moot you're doing. But the idea is that, one of my seniors told me that a good memorial is one which is sort of like a story, like a narrative. So the main essence is that regardless of where you're putting your law or fact, it has to be coherent, easy to read for someone who is not familiar with what is happening there. That's pretty much from my side about drafting. Charu, if you could take up the oral rounds.
Yes, yes. So in respect of drafting, as Arpita already stated, that you can adopt your own scheme, whether it's law fact conclusion or fact law conclusion. However, whichever scheme you choose to adopt, you should stay consistent upon it. You shouldn't go like that. For one issue, you will do fact law conclusion approach, and for the other issue, you will do it the other way around, because obviously there wouldn't be a flow, and it would definitely be difficult for the person who is reading your memorial to understand your narrative. All right, so now I would go on to the oral rounds. So for the oral rounds, I'll take it up in two parts. The first is that how you should argue, and the second is speaker notes. Now first, coming to the how you should argue. While you're presenting your arguments, so first, I'll go in the sequence which you normally adopt in the courtroom. First, you take the permission of the bench to approach the dais. When you're there, you start with your opening statement, right? So how you go about it is that greetings to the bench. So you introduce yourself that this is the counsel appearing on behalf of party A in the case of A versus B. And then you present your issues very crisply. So how you do it is that if there are 4 issues, you say that the council will argue issue 1, which relates to the maintainability of the petition, and issue 2, which relates to the constitutionality of section 124A of IPC. And the co-counsel will argue in respect of, let's say, whether sedition was committed by Mr. A or not, and with the 4th issue, that whether there is a violation of freedom of press or not. So by doing this, what you are doing is you are building a roadmap in the mind of the judge as to how you are going to proceed about your arguments, right? Once you're done with this, it's your choice whether you want to ask the judge or you directly want to proceed to the facts. But if you wish to proceed with the facts, just try to sum it up in 5 points, like very crisply. These facts do not include law. You just state the facts which are in your favor. So for example, you can say that Mr. A is the citizen of India and has done so many good work if the matter relates to sedition. So it depends from fact to fact, but again, it's your choice. Then you can move on to the issues. Now let's say the first issue is in respect of maintainability. So you would state that the first issue is in respect of whether the maintainability of section 136 is there or not. In this respect, the council will proceed in A, B, C manner. So what I'm trying to state is that you should always build a roadmap while you're arguing. If you don't do that, if you just randomly give arguments to the judge, he would be very confused at the end as to what you were trying to say. Now I'll tell you why this happens. The judge who comes to judge your moot, unless it's the drafter of the moot problem, he has been briefed with the moot problem for an hour or 2 maximum. He would obviously understand the facts only in respect, only to the extent which have been explained to him and not beyond it. However, you on the other hand have researched on your facts for a month or 2, or in case of international or arbitration moot, you have researched on it for 5 or 6 months. So obviously you have a better holding over your facts than the judge. However, it does not mean that you manipulate the judge. He understands it very well. Now, what you should do, your approach should be to divert the attention of the judge again and again to the facts of the case. Why is that? That is because the judge knows the law. The judge knows the concise facts only to the extent which have been told to him. But you are there to present your facts from both the sides. And mind you, the similar facts from both the sides. It's your way how you present those facts. It's up to you how you present the same facts in different form, because you need to argue from both the sides, right? So you need to consider all these things while arguing. Then the next thing is, that a lot of times I've seen people bring up compendium but not using it. So your approach shouldn't be binding like 5 to 10 compendiums. It should be as per your need. Just make sure that you make the judges refer to your compendium. So compendium, for those of you who do not know what a compendium is, so there are basically many case laws or many articles that you would refer to while you are doing your research. However, during your oral rounds, you would restrict your arguments to some substantial case laws which have a direct bearing upon your case. Okay, so for example, if it's a matter relating to privacy, there have been ample number of cases. There has been a case of Kharak Singh in 1954. However, you would not refer to it. You would refer to K. Puttaswamy case because it's relevant to you. Now you do not, now you don't refer to the entire judgment by saying that the judge may refer to this compendium. What you do is that you get the first page of the judgment, the relevant parts of the judgment that you intend the judge to refer, you highlight it. Once you are done with that, you flag it. Okay, you ask the judge to refer to that particular part in the compendium. And when the judge is on that compendium, then you direct his attention towards it. That your lordship, the counsel seeks to argue that K. Puttaswamy case states XYZ. And in this respect, the counsel in this particular case states XYZ. All right. So it's up to you how you argue. I'm just telling you an approach towards how you should make the judges refer to your compendium, because just giving the compendium in the hands of the judge does not matter. He would not open it unless you make him refer it. Similarly goes the thing with the moot problem. You should have the printout of your moot problem. You should know it by heart, because obviously you should have the tendency, like you should know how to twist the facts in your favor. You can ask the judge to refer. So how you ask is, you don't order the judge, obviously. You ask him politely, if your lordship may kindly refer to page number 4 of the fact sheet, para number this, line number this. And you read along with the judge that particular line. This helps bringing, so this will sync your arguments in the mind of the judge, because he will know what you are actually trying to state. All right. Now, also, you might have a lot of arguments with respect to a particular issue, but try to argue the strongest of your arguments in the beginning of your oral rounds. Why is that? Because you would have very limited time to present your arguments. If you start with your weak arguments, obviously the judge would cross-question you again and again, and obviously you wouldn't get the chance to argue your strong points. Another point is that while you're arguing, the judge will often try to get you off the track. He might do it deliberately, or he might not do it deliberately. However, you should know how to bring him back on the track. You should know your boundaries, because obviously the judge knows the entire spectrum of the law. However, your research is again limited to the issues which are involved in the moot problem. So if your problem relates to Section 4 of the Competition Act, the judge might ask you that, counsel, tell me what happens under Section 3, or counsel tells me what happens when there is a joint venture under Section 3, which might not be relevant to your problem. So don't let him go there. If he tells you that, counsel, tell me this, you can obviously state that the counsel would like to state that this particular issue is not relevant to the facts here. The counsel would like to state again, for the convenience of the court, that this is what the counsel is trying to argue. So this will build a framework in the mind of the judge that you are also clear with your arguments. All right. Now there are now this is what I've told you, that what are the do's. Now I would tell you what are the don'ts. So never say sorry. If the judge tells you that, no, counsel, this is this, so you don't say no. This is not how you should go about it. What you say is that the counsel begs to differ with your lordship, or if you want some time to think over your argument, if you can't answer the question which is posed by the judge there and there itself, so you can state, then you can state that the counsel will address this particular question by the end of the oral rounds. Or you can say that the counsel would like to take additional 5 or 10 seconds so that he or she could think on it. So you obviously have the liberty to say all this. However, it should come with utmost politeness. Also, you never say that I concede this issue. You never say that. However strong the judge might force you to say this, you don't say that I concede the issue. You always try to dive that point. You always, so if you think that your maintainability point is not being appreciated by the judge, then you say, ki, all right, not all right, indeed, your lordship, the council would like to move on to the second issue because of the shortage of the time. The council would argue the second and third issue in respect of this, and then you proceed. The judge would also understand, and you would then proceed. If the judge is adamant, then obviously you have to find your way through it. Also, whenever you are saying the prayer, the other speaker, your co-counsel, he would stand wherever he's sitting, because obviously it's normal, because it's like the etiquette. Also, like, I don't have anything else to say in respect of arguing. However, now let's come to the speaker notes. Now, while you're making your speaker notes, I have seen a lot of people that they cannot distinguish between speaker notes and the memorial. See, understand that the memorial is not crisp. It is to state the law, the fact. It is to make sure that the person who is reading it understands each and every part of it. However, speaker notes are for you. You already know whatever has been stated in your memorial. You don't have to write it all over again in your speaker notes. Your speaker notes should be very short. Now, why I am emphasizing on this is because so if you have, for example, 5 pages in front of you on the podium, and the judge asks you some particular question which is in relation to issue 3, which is on the page number 4 of your speaker notes. So you wouldn't get time to switch to page number 4, and it would look very unprofessional if you do that, because the judge expects you to know your arguments by heart. Therefore, you should ensure that you have your notes very crisply on 1 page or 2 pages, whatever is convenient for you, but you have it in front of you. And try to write the page number of the moot problem or the page number of the compendium which you seek the judge to refer to. This will, and highlight it so that it's in your mind, because you won't understand when you approach the dais, but the judge tries to take you off track very often. So you should have everything right in front of you. I think that's it. You can take me.
So yeah, before I get to the specifics of, some tips about what works and what doesn't work in your speaker rounds, I personally feel that when you are starting off by making your speaker notes, like in your first or second practice oral rounds, try and keep them detailed. Try and work all of your arguments in your speaker rounds, so in your practice rounds, because with time you will come to an understanding of what works for you, which argument is getting you in trouble, some other way of formulating an argument. So at the starting, keep it detailed, and with more and more subsequent rounds, you can shorten it. You have to shorten it. Okay. That being said, when you are giving your actual speaker rounds, as Charu already stated, keep it sequential, as in keep the judge in the loop, tell him this is my argument, these are the sub arguments that I'm making, this is how I'll argue, this is the time I'll be taking. So keep it sequential, keep the other person in the loop, he knows where you're trying to get, what will come next. That being said, one important thing that you have to keep in mind is that you have to be flexible. As Charu already said, that judges tend to question you a lot. It's not a speech, so to say. They'll ask you, interrupt you for clarifications, for questions, for your opinion on a particular thing or not. So you have to have the ability to get back to what you were saying. And for that, it's important that it's not a speech that you have, sort of rote learned by your heart, but by the end of your preparation for oral rounds, as in when you're trying to give your actual rounds, it's just the arguments and the sub-arguments that are in sort of a roadmap in your head. And you have the ability to be flexible about it. Okay, so these were some general observations that I had. Now, with respect to what authorities you should cite when you are doing your speaker rounds, because as Charu already said, that when you will make your memo, you will try and make it as detailed as possible with lots of authorities in it. But when you are giving your speaker rounds, you have to be smart about what authorities you are citing. So obviously you have to cite a landmark case and any case which lays down the essentials. In addition to that, you can include those cases which are giving sort of interpretation about a word or term which is not clear, which is not given anywhere in your problem. Say for example, in the dispute resolution clause, the parties have agreed that they will arbitrate a dispute which is in relation to their commercial interests, and the problem has not defined what a commercial interest is. So you can definitely look for a case law which defines, okay, commercial interest is this, and you can include it in your speaker notes. In addition to that, always include an authority which gives support to a position of law which is not obvious or which is contrary to what the common sense states. Like for example, in an arbitration dispute about which party has an obligation, say uh, is it the buyer's duty? There's a specific requirement of law, compliance of law in the buyer's country. Now, is it the buyer's duty to inform the seller about those particular requirements, or is it the seller's duty? So, say the legally it's the buyer's duty to intimate the seller about the requirements, but you find a case law which says that no, in XYZ circumstances, which are similar to your case, it's the seller's duty to find out. So, these authorities you should include in your speaker notes, and be careful about the authorities that you're including. It's not just the para that you're utilizing that you need to know. For your speaker rounds, you should know the facts of those case, and most importantly the applicable law. You have to convince the judge that the context of that case and the case that you are arguing is similar, and therefore you can rely on that case. For example, when I was arguing for my FDI mode, I used a case law from WTO. Now, WTO case laws involve trade issues, and I was arguing an investment law case. But I had to convince the judge that no, see, there is a parallel that I can draw because circumstances in both these cases are similar. So keep in mind that the applicable law in the case that you are using and in the context in which you are using, you can convince the judge that yes, it can be used. That's there, but one thing which is different from national moods and arbitration or international moods, especially arbitration moods, is that the bench is not very specific about the hierarchy of authorities. I mean, it's not like if there's a Supreme Court case, then the deal is done. There are many instances where you make your argument, then using articles, research work. In that ways, arbitration moods are pretty flexible about the authorities that you are using, and there's no one set hierarchy of authorities that you can use. As long as what you're arguing makes commercial sense, even if it does not have that much of a legal backing, the bench would be ready to buy it. Now, with respect to facts, Charu has already emphasized on this, but when you're stating facts, don't state facts in vacuum. And this is more so important when your problems are bulky, because neither you nor the judges have the time to flip through pages and reach the fact that you're trying to say. Have it noted which page number, which para number you are using, and try and often engage the bench with those paras, because that serves two purposes. Firstly, it will save time, and secondly, when the judge has seen the fact for himself, it will kind of leave a deeper impact on him. Uh, then there's this thing of flagging and document handling. And so in arbitration moods, teams usually do not use compendiums because again, hierarchy of authorities is not that rigid. But flagging and document handling is a very underrated skill, and it's very important in arbitration moods of how your documents are presented. Because if your problem is bulky, say it's 50 pages long, then it's very imperative that before you go to the speaker rounds, you split out the important documents, have them flagged, mark the important paras, mark the important articles, because it's easier for you to argue that ways. And it's more so because I don't know how things will play out when we are having oral rounds over video conferencing this year. But in unlike in international and national pool where the speaker goes to the podium and speaks, in the arbitration mood, both the counsel and the co-counsel sit at the same place, and teamwork is something which the judges actually appreciate and even mark you upon. So while you are arguing, your teammate can flip through the pages, point your attention to the exact page number. That's with it. The second last thing that I would like to speak about is building a question bank. And this helps because sometimes even the most obvious of things that you know the answer to, when you are speaking in the speaker rounds, you might lose your time formulating the correct words in which you want to say them. So make a question bank and keep it in a work in progress. Right from when you finished your memorial till you have your speaker rounds, keep a question bank, include factual questions, include legal questions, basic questions, just every questions under the sun that you can think of, questions that have come up in your practice rounds. Keep updating it, keep revisiting it so that you minimize your chances of getting caught off guard in your speaker rounds. And the last and the most important issue is timing. Everyone who has been a speaker in a moot will vouch to the fact that regardless of how much time is given to you, you will always run short of time when you are arguing. So for this, my senior gave me an advice. If it's possible, make your speaker notes for 3 scenarios. One is the best case scenario where you get to argue all your issues with all your arguments with all your authorities, which rarely happens. The second is a in-between kind of a scenario where, say, you allotted 10 minutes to an issue, but you get, say, 6 minutes to argue, which is also fair enough. So you'll cut out on some authorities, some facts, but still you get a decent time to argue. The last situation is the worst case scenario, which happens quite a lot of times, that you are just left with 2 minutes to make your argument. And if you are not prepared for that scenario, you will waste 1 minute panicking and you will be just left with 1 minute to argue. So to avoid that situation, prepare a worst case scenario speech which just has your most clinching arguments, your most convincing authorities that you put across, and you know that what you're going to say when you just have 2 minutes to make your argument. So yeah, that's pretty much from my side about oral rounds.
In addition to what Arpita stated, I would like to emphasize on 2 things. The first is that you should have a separate fact sheet with you. Not fact sheet, but you should have a separate document with you wherein you state. So I should tell you that in national moods, the case laws hold a very prime importance. So if you're referring to a particular case, you will refer to only the ratio. However, you should know the facts of the case, the ratio of the case, the bench strength, and where it has been argued. This is because the judge expects you to know all this, and he might or might not question you on this. Again, also one more thing: while you're arguing or while you're researching, you might come across many things which, again, everybody else or all the other teams will know. So try to think out of the box and try to present your creative arguments, because this will give you brownie points. The judge would have heard so many teams by the time your turn comes that he would have been exhausted by hearing same argument over and over again. Therefore, arguing something different or on different lines always gives you or always makes you earn brownie points. But again, this does not imply that you argue anything. It should obviously be relevant to your fact sheet. All right. Also, you should know the general law. By general law, what I mean is that if your matter is on constitutional law, it means that you should know the preamble of the act. You can always divert the attention of the judge towards the aim of the act it purports to achieve. This will again make the judge realize that yes, you have the knowledge of the law in and out. Also, you need to know the basic principles of Competition Act. Same goes for any other law. I'm just taking the example of Competition Act. And one thing that I missed out is that while you're making your compendium, make sure that you have all the original authorities. As in, if you're citing a case, then get the original source. I don't know how it will work in online moods, but if there is a possibility in the near future, whatever it is, but have the true copy of the case law that you're referring to, or any article or report that you're referring to. Try not to refer to Manupatra. Your first source should be the books which are there in the library. If not books, then try to get the case from the SCC website or from the official website of the court. They have the original copy of the true copy of the order on their website. I think that's it, I would say.
Charu and Arpita, I have something to add to this.
Yeah.
Since Charu has covered the national moods and Arpita has covered the arbitration moods, I would like to make sure that you guys understand the difference between the argumentative style that is in the arbitration moods and in the national moods. So in the national moods, guys, you generally make sure that your tone is a little bit submissive, because then you're arguing in front of the judges, where in India you always denote them as your honor. Whereas in the arbitration moods, it's generally they're all contractual in nature, so you need to understand that in the arbitration, the judges that you have, you are actually paying for them. So you need to understand that the tone, the submission that you have in the arbitration moods and in the national moods, they are entirely different. You do not never refer to the judges in the arbitration moods as your honor. You always refer them as sir, generally. That is something different for the national moods, and it also is with respect to your opening lines. Always make sure that your opening lines in the national moods are a bit submissive, and you make sure that the judge's ego satisfaction is always done, whereas that is something that is never done in an arbitration mode. So further, whenever you cite a case law, I think this has already been discussed by Arpita. However, whenever you cite a case law with respect to national moods, always know that the bench always know the total number of judges that were there deciding that particular case, the primary issue and the ratio of that particular case. And similarly in the arbitration scenario, I mean, I particularly understand about the investment arbitration cases. In that case, you necessarily need to know that what was the BIT between the parties, what was the particular clause, because if a particular case is, for example, related to expropriation, you need to know that what expropriation clause was there in that particular BIT. That might differ. So that is why the context in which you're using the case law, that is you make sure that is very important. Further, I mean, this is one more observation that I had while doing my moods, that it's generally the associates or in the preliminary rounds or in the quarterfinals, the judges generally tend to give better marks to the candidates who actually argue fact intensively. Whereas generally in the final rounds or in the semi-finals and final rounds, the judges are generally, because they are more senior judges, they just come to the podium and they start judging. There is no such intensive briefing that is done to them with respect to the final judges and judges of the final rounds and the semi-final rounds generally. So there, the argumentation also changes. There you need to make sure that you, as a speaker, argue more on a legal scale. That is something that I noticed while organizing events through MC or also while arguing before the benches.
Yeah, I mean, when you will observe it that in your initial rounds, you tend to be questioned more than, in your advanced rounds, because in initial round, it's also one of the factors for marking how much you are able to hold your ground and question you for the sake of badgering to see how, it varies from judge to judge, but mostly up till your quarters, your judges are going to be, very asking you questions again and again and again, and very intense questioning. By the time you reach your advanced stages, they'll more be interested in knowing your appreciation for law. So they'll not be asking you, basic questions. They think that by the time you've reached there, you've already answered them. That's why you're there. So the question tends to, get a little bit less strenuous as you go through the advanced rounds.
Pointing to the Gopal's advice, you have to be submissive. But I want to add to this that while you are putting forward your arguments, you need to do it very politely. Like I said, that you cannot use the words sorry, no, your lordship. you have to be very polite while doing this. That indeed, your lordship, but the council seeks to have a different view on this, or the council begs to differ on this point. Also, make sure that while you are arguing, the judge is on the same page as you are, because many a times, so how you'll understand is this by understanding the tension of the court. So for example, if you are the petitioner, if you're the first team that has to argue in the court, then obviously you're the guinea pig and you need to understand then and there itself. So, but if you're the respondent, then you will understand by that time that what the judge is trying to seek from the person. Is he trying to grill the person and understand how much tension is he able to undertake, or is the judge very okay with whatever arguments you are trying to put? So try to engage the judge as much as possible. Try to divert the attention of the judge towards the fact sheet, towards the memorial, towards the compendium as much as possible, because this will keep him active. Because obviously the judge won't understand anything and everything, whatever you state while you are giving your oral rounds. I think that's all about orals.
Thus, it's important to engage the judge because you realize that person is hearing the same thing again and again and again and again for 8, 9, 10 times. So, only if your argumentation style is something that stands out, or if your argument is something which is separate from the others, do you, stand a chance to get his attention, or if you make a conscious effort to keep him engaged. So that is why we are emphasizing again and again, involve him with the problem, involve him with your memorial, involve him through the entire process and keep him on the same track.
I think we should address the last issue that we wanted to. Has everybody filled the form, the questionnaire?
Who has the access of the form, Arpita or Charu, you?
I think Ronak has the access because he was the one who uploaded it.
I mean, who created the form? That is really important.
Yeah, I created the form.
Yeah, so can you please check the responses?
Check. Meanwhile, you guys start with this discussion. I mean, it's an important point which often goes unaddressed.
Exactly.
In a lot of discussions we have.
So, all right, guys, I mean, before we continue with the discussion on how mooting affects our mental health, how we should deal with the disappointments, because that is something that a lot of times happen to us. And there have been instances, I mean, during the past MCAs or even during the past academic sessions, that the problems have been there with the students while dealing with the disappointments, while dealing with the success and everything. So this is something that we wanted to discuss. Before we delve into that, I just wanted to ask that if anyone has right now any questions preliminary, we'll be holding a question and answer round after this session. But if someone has a very pertinent question that he feels or she feels, I'll be like, okay, assuming none. So mental health is something that is very essentially important for while you do a moot. Essentially, because mooting is not just an exercise of you researching your memory, you researching your moot problems, you arguing there. It's also about your teamwork. It's also about because you spend your time, your maximum period of time during that period with the team that you are allotted to. So, for example, for an international moot, for an arbitration moot, a lot of times you spend time for like 5, 6, 7 months with a particular team. Issues sometimes always arise. Complaints also come to MCA. Sometimes they're resolved outside MCA. And a lot of times, that is one issue that always comes, that I am working more, that my teammate is not working according to what I expect. So that is something that always a lot of times affect the mental health of the student. Last time, I mean, this is something that is very experiential, and last time MCA did face a problem with a person not able to qualify for a particular pool because of his team, and then that was a tipping point for that person. So this is something that we also need to realize, that irrespective of mooting, it's also a team exercise, and that also needs to be taken into consideration while you begin your your mooting preparation, your stability, or your relation with your team. That is something that also always needs to be considered, because everyone does not have the same work ethic or same work timings. You also always need to take that into consideration and never be too stubborn about that, because being stubborn about that actually does lead to issues, issues within your team. So that is something that is very important. Then it comes to how to dealing with the disappointment, because not everyone, because if suppose for an international pool or international mood problems, international competitions, like for example in Jessup, a lot of teams participate, over to 300 teams participate. Even in India rounds, it's 30 team, more than 30 teams participating, and only 4 teams qualify for the world rounds. So essentially, you competing in that mood and going to Washington is like not a, the probability is not generally in the favor of the participants when they actually delve into the moods. So you always need to consider what mooting entails to you. What are the implications that even if you succeed in mooting, and what is the implication that if you fail? Because trust me guys, the implications that you fail in mooting, they are not very bad. They are not very serious. It's only that you have involved with your sufficient period of time for that year, but the experience that it leads to, the learning process that it leads to, it actually holds much more value. And being for a placement perspective or for the interview perspective also, generally you getting an achievement that does not matter to the recruiters at all. So if your primary concern is that, okay, if I don't do good in a moot, if I don't win awards, I'll not get a placement, it'll be difficult for me. That is not any time the case. It's just a recreational activity. It's an important activity for us because it actually is the primary activity outside the law school curriculum that happens to engages us in the contours of law and how to argue and other things, because that is something that we do not do in the law school curriculum. So that is a very important activity, but considering it as the only sole activity for your success, or defining it as your success or failure in law school, that is not something that should be done.
To what,
Yeah.
to what Gokul already stated, I would also say that while you're mooting, you should understand that the end is not as important as the process is. Because obviously one team will win, the other would be runners up, there would be another second runner up. But what you achieve through the entire process is not just learning of the law, but also how you work with the team, the coordination, the drafting skills, the researching skills, how you read the law, how you read the facts. All these things you learn during the moot while you're preparing for the moot are more important than winning the moot. This is what I feel. Also, guys, Gokul has addressed the point of during and after the moot, but I would also say that before you're taking up a moot, it's never too late to start. If somebody feels that we haven't mooted in our first year, so it's just a waste of time. It's not true. You can start anytime you want. It's never too late, and we all are always there to help you through the process if you need anything. And also, there is nothing like mooting is the only way through which you will secure placement or you will achieve whatever you want in your life. Because through mooting, I agree that you learn a lot, but mooting is not the only way to achieve it.
Yeah, so I agree with what both of you said, and I'm glad that we're taking this up because this is often left unaddressed. It's always, this idea around mooting, that achievement mooting, and that's the way about mooting. But yeah, so I'd like to share a personal story, and I hope my friend wouldn't mind. So in the second year, one of my friends did the national pool, and he ended up not getting a great rank. Lower rank, and kind of broke his heart to do it. But the same friend ended up getting the best speaker mention the same year. So what I'm trying to say is that whatever ranks you get in the pool are not that material for your success in the moot, and honestly they don't make much of a difference, except of what mood you end up doing with that rank. Because that mood problem is in a different context. It's basically to get you working, get you into the track of working, get into the mental frame of mooting. So don't take pool ranks that seriously. And if I can share my own experience, so I had a mental breakdown before I did my arbitration pool speaker rounds. I had a really really bad meltdown, but I can assure you that the amount of effort that you will put will definitely show. And I ended up getting really good speaker scores equivalent to some of the most seasoned mooters in the college. So don't take these results too much into your heart, pool rankings and stuff. And yes, so the thing with mooting about teamwork and issues arising, well, honestly, I think it's inevitable. Everyone is on a different page. Everyone wants to seek something different out of the moot. You may be more invested. You may feel that you're more invested than most of your teammates. But trust me that even if your team is not that supportive, and if you feel that you're putting more effort than others, you will definitely take away more from that mood. Like, it may not sort of culminate into the results, because definitely there are too many contingencies involved in mooting. uh, you know Bad management with mooting, these are things that don't appear on the face of it, but organizing mess ups, teammates not being supportive. But if you have put in your heart and soul into the mood that you are doing, trust me, you will take a lot from it. You will develop an interest in that field of law, and it will overall be a good exercise for you to do.
I would like to add a point regarding this. As Gokul has already pointed regarding in a mood problem, we have allotted a mood and a team is working on a particular mood, and one of the teammate is not working as per the condition or is not giving his 100%. So in this condition, there is no point of getting mental stress or something like that. I will tell you an example that I went last year. There was a team participating in a moot, but one of the teammate was actually not working. So in that condition, what MCA actually did was they have sent us the complaint mail that this particular teammate is not working, and MCA has taken up a proper step to see what the actual condition is. And the point what I want to make is don't have any stress in your mind, and just approach MCA. We will take a necessary and proper step in such condition, and we will ensure that each and every participant is doing a mood properly with proper mental health and without any stress. This is our ultimate aim, and we will definitely fulfill this. Yes, Gokul.
Yeah, I mean, summarizing, if Arpita or Charu, you guys have some other points?
No, I think we should start with the question answers. If there are any, we would be happy to take them up.
Right. So, guys, any questions to the panelists we have today?
Guys, the mandate that was given to us was very generic. So we would be very happy to entertain specific questions, because mood is a very context specific thing. So I can't tell you how to draft when I don't know what you have in mind, which pool you're trying to have in mind, which mood you have in your mind.
If there's no such questions, I'll assume that okay, either you guys have understood everything very clearly,
For everything.
But guys, either way, we are always open to any help if you expect from us in future. In fact, we would be more than happy if you have any problem, whether it's mooting or the pre-effects of mooting or the post-effects of mooting. We would be happy to deal with them along with you. So if nobody has any question, we can wind up.
okay, let's give them 1 minute. If they still don't have any question, let them think. Then we'll end the session then. think that no one has any questions. I think they are like, you guys have explained them so well.
Guys, are you not planning to do any pools?
Yes, please don't do that. Please do both collections.
Have we scared you enough to not take up mooting at all? I think no one has any questions.
All right then. If we don't have any, once again, I think.
Shruti Mishra said, wait.
Yeah, she said wait. Okay, let's wait then. I think the dead silence is actually scaring us. If you have any questions, you can please now open your microphones and actually ask us.
Okay, I'm sorry, it was taking me time to type it out. So my question is that not all organizers give out rules on how to go about the compendium, or if they want a certain way of formatting it or not. And this is a question that a lot of people have in their mind whenever they come to making the compendium. So what would be the ideal way to go about it?
Should I address this? Are you asking it in respect of national moot or international or
Like
arbitration?
in generally, if you can give specific advices, that would be great, obviously.
Yes, from the perspective of national moot, so this happens. Yes, that's true. There are a lot of organizers don't give any specific guidelines in respect of compendium. So what you should do is that you can either compile it in a book, in a form of a book, or you can have specific, like separate booklets or sheets, and you can ask your researcher to deliver it to the bench whenever you argue that particular issue. Or if you choose to have it in the form of the compendium, like in a form of a book, then you can ask the judge to refer to a specific flag that you have already marked. I don't think that the judges or the organizers have any problem in respect of compendium. They usually accept it, unless there is any guideline to the contrary. Did I answer your question, Shruti?
Yes, thank you.
Arpita, you can also say about the guide.
Yeah, I mean, from like the moots I have done, so their compendium was not, not an issue. Teams were not using compendiums because, again, I said that, in arbitration, the problem itself is so bulky. A lot of time would just go referring to the problem itself, and then there's again no set hierarchy of case laws and not that much of an importance given to case laws. So, from my understanding, for arbitration moots, at least, compendium is not something that's an essential. You can just use it for your aid, like your understanding, you remembering the case laws, but like not the bench is not interested in the compendium.
Also, compendium is not an essential factor to the national moots. It's only to make the judges refer to it while you are arguing. Because obviously, in a memorial, you cannot incorporate everything and anything that you have researched while you were drafting your memorial. So, compendium is only to facilitate the smooth flowing of your arguments. That if you expect the judge, like if the judge might expect you to have an authority for whatever you are stating. So you should have that authority in your compendium. Whatever arguments that you are trying to state during your oral rounds, you should have the authority for it, even if you're not expressly stating the case law or the article or the report while you are going through your oral arguments.
Exactly. So guys, compendium is actually just a smart way to turn around the word limits of the memorials. That's it.
Anybody has any other question?
Is anyone that has any question right now? I think you guys are fantastic. Understood everything very clearly. So all right, assuming none. So with that note, we would MCA, and we would like to on behalf of MCA, would like to thank Charu and Arpita for taking out their time and guiding juniors how to vote, how to go about the drafting, how to go about the arguments, speaker notes, and also actually telling the hacks. That is something that was like something we figured out in our second and third years as to how to do it, because we were not able to access the the relevant literature. So that is something that is a very good head start for students for the now second years. So I would like to thank both the speakers on behalf of MCA to actually take up this session and also address very relevant topic of the mental health. That is something that has always been left unaddressed in my law school years. Further, I would also like to thank all the participants for joining us today in this session. And since I assume that you don't have any doubts, you are like all clear. I expect a much wide and a great participation in the pool, in the international pool, in the national pool, and in the arbitration pool. I hope that you guys do fantastic. On that note, I would like to thank you guys and end this session.